Hey, welcome to Sound Test. My name is Brian, and the question I have for today is: are shorter albums better than longer ones? Let's talk about that. So I was re-listening through Kanye West's new album, Donda, and if I was a child and I was like 11, 12, 11, 12-year-old me, and they said, hey, Kanye West is coming out with an album with like an hour and a half of, new content, I would have been like super excited. But now, when I hear an hour and a half of like straight up just new music, at times it feels like a chore more than excitement. Now, there's some issues with Donda that I have, but I think one of the main issues that is just way too long. Like, it is a very long album. And I'm going to quote my best friend when we were talking about the album. And the quote he had was, "There's a good album in here somewhere." And I think that's so true. I think that like perfectly encapsulates the album. There's a good album in there somewhere. There's just way too much clutter to find that good album. So the album, if I'm not mistaken, has like 26 tracks, which kind of feels ridiculous. But not only that, there's several of those tracks that kind of repeat, where they're still the same track, but a different verse here and there, or a different featured artist. And yeah, as granted, is towards the end of the album, but it's still a long album just to sit through. And as I'm going through it, I'm kind of constantly going through my head was, this track wasn't good. This track wasn't good. This track wasn't good. Oh, this was a good track. Oh, that was a great track. This is another great track. All right, this track isn't good. This track isn't good. This track isn't good. And it just, that album had so much ups and downs in terms of quality. And it felt like a lot of it could have been on the cutting room floor. So as I say that, I kind of think back about some of my favorite albums from the last few years. And I think back of KOD by J. Cole, Damn by Kendrick Lamar, the Off Season this year by Kendrick Lamar, Call Me When You Get There from Tyler the Creator, Room 25 from No Name, King's Disease from Nas. And when I'm kind of think back at all these albums, there was one huge factor and kind of like correlating thing between all of them, and that was they were fairly short albums. I mean, all those albums I named, they were under an hour long, and some of them were under 40 minutes long. And so, you would think, why would you want less music? Why would you want less of a product? But as I think about it and kind of think about the replayability of those albums and like the actual impact of those albums, I think they were a lot better because they were shorter. So let's think about like a few of the characteristics of shorter albums and kind of why they're more stronger than a long album and what qualities make them a better, well put piece than the longer counterparts. So the first aspect I want to think about it is kind of from the analytical standpoint. So especially when you're dealing with rap music, there's a lot of metaphors, deeper meanings. There's a lot of clever wordplay that, your first listen, some of them you'll get instantly, and some of them takes a few listens to really kind of absorb and kind of, be able to analyze those things. And when we look back at these shorter albums, that kind of allow you to do that way easier. If you think about it, let's just say King's Disease. That album comes in about 38 minutes. I can listen to that album twice, which would be still under the amount of time it would take to listen through Donda. And that's still with sitting through all the bad tracks of Donda. And, when it comes to like going back and re-listening and really getting understanding the music, getting these metaphors, is way easier to do that with a shorter album. But on top of that, I feel like King's Disease is much more intimate album. The Off Season by J. Cole is a very intimate album. And Damn by Kendrick Lamar is a very intimate album. And it's very intimate because you have less room to kind of go all over the place. Things a lot more compact, things a lot more focused. And I think that's the key thing. It is a way more focused project. And it feels like everything was there intentionally. It feels like every track was like, hey, this is the best that we have from these sessions. These are the best that this artists have at this time. And because you have that really great focus, each track hits so much harder. And don't get me wrong, bigger projects can have that level. Bigger projects can have, this sustainability and this, things that we could talk about for years and years and years. But when I think about big projects recently, they just seem like they full of clutter and fluff. And part of that, I think, is a product of us being in the streaming era. So what I mean by that. So let's go back to 2006, 2007 Kanye, and we have Late Registration. And Late Registration is probably one of my favorite Kanye albums. And it's possibly, one of the greatest hip hop albums of all time. I don't feel bad. I don't feel weird making that statement. And that was a full length album. That was about a 70-minute album. And there was a lot of great tracks in there. But I think the biggest differentiator from albums from that time era and albums now was that I feel like artists had to justify that price tag. The only way that you could get those songs were buying the album. And so, if consumers have to buy this $12, $15 CD, they want a return on investment. If they're paying this much money for this album, they want to get as much content as possible. Because here's the other kind of thing. If you want to think of it in terms of time spent, if you want to think of it of money spent for the time of the product, $12, $13 for something that lasts an hour, that's not a bad value. But the underlying factor was when you bought that CD, that was something that you would use for years and years and years. So that $12 really brought you a lot of entertainment for a very long period of time. However, in the streaming age, we don't think of it as buying an album anymore. We think of, oh, Kanye has a new album. Let me just go on Spotify. Let me go on YouTube, Apple Music. And that $12 that we would pay for an album, for that one piece of content, now we're paying the equivalent of $12 for hundreds of thousands of songs that we can access to pretty much at any time. So that really changes the value that we have when it comes to what do we get out of an album? What do we get out of listening in an album? And I kind of think of it like this. If I paid $12 for Donda, would I be satisfied with that? Regardless of the amount of tracks in the album, would I have been satisfied with that product for that price? Because you see, when you're paying for a streaming service, or better yet, if it's just free and available in cases like YouTube, and I'm just listening to that product and I don't like it, it's whatever. I can just move on. But when you have putting the monetary value for it, yeah, you want to justify the price that you're paying into this product. And so I think that's one of the huge, kind of disconnects now, is that you're not paying specifically for that album nowadays. A lot of cases you're paying for the right to stream the album. And so I feel like it's in situations where now artists can just throw anything and everything out there. Whatever sticks rises up to the charts. Whatever doesn't, hey, whatever. It just gets less plays. And with Donda, that's what I feel like. I felt like there's a few tracks in there that really stick. A few tracks in there that like really hit hard. And then the others are just, they feel like filler. But my question is, why have filler when in this modern age you don't need to? So I want to put this in perspective as well. Let's think back to LPs, and LPs as in long plays, when we had, when vinyl records was the standard of listening. And I want to think back to that because with an LP, one, it was expensive to produce the actual vinyl record itself, but it also kind of forced the artist to conform into a certain time limit. Because when you look at the time frame of an actual album and the cost it takes to actually produce the album, artists essentially had to make really short products and give their best effort in those short products. Now, of course, I'm not saying there wasn't bad records from the 60s and 70s, 80s. Of course, I'm not saying that. But when the artist was able to realistically produce an album once every year, because the content itself was much smaller, but also you got kind of like a curated release of whatever that artist was going through, that artist style, or that artist mentality. You got a really curated version of that because they can only fit so much on one vinyl. And then if they had two vinyls, boy, it started to get expensive. And then you knew the artist was really serious about putting some pieces out when they had a double album release. And I think that helped a lot when it came to having a really concise narrative for these artist releases. Then as we got over time, we was able to expand to the cassette and expand to the CD, to the point where, hey, now artists can have much bigger projects, which in a lot of cases were great. I can go back to a lot of full-length albums that I really loved, and full-length albums I can listen, from front to back. One of those is Common's Like Water for Chocolate. I can listen to that album endlessly from top to bottom, and it feels like this great experience, this grand experience. But as time goes on, I felt like artists, because they didn't have to essentially fill up a full album, or, they didn't have to worry about producing this big masterpiece every single time. I think that works better in the music industry, because now we think about J. Cole. A lot of his recent works were pretty small. And instead of giving these really big 90-minute CDs or 90-minute projects, we're getting a 40-minute one here, 50-minute one here. And the amount of releases tend to go way quicker. And it's kind of great because now artists can really just drop projects really quickly. And just the way people consume content nowadays, you drop a 40-minute album and people are going to eat it up. Then next year you drop another 40-minute album and people are going to eat it up. Then a year after that, as you see the progress. And so my argument is not that long albums are bad, because of course I would love a highly detailed, highly focused, hour and a half record that's hits on all cylinders. But at the same time, I really appreciate these smaller projects. I really appreciate these smaller albums in which you can really soak in a lot with a lot of quality with little time. And so I know this was kind of a weird rant, but part of me wishes that with the release of Donda, Kanye really focused in on what works and what didn't work. And I feel like his whole marketing behind this album, with the live listening sessions, and him kind of still mastering and mixing the album as time went on. Yeah, it was a great publicity stunt, but in the end, I felt like it ended up resulting into a unfocused project that, as bad as the quote is, make people wish that the old Kanye was back.